Perspectives, Finding Common Ground, a podcast series that brings together a panel of thought leader perspectives as a forum to socialize and problem solve education technology issues with the goal to ultimately find common ground.
Hi, and welcome to this episode of Perspectives, Finding Common Ground. Today we're going to be talking about making data dashboards actionable. So we've got some wonderful guests here to join us. And as usual, we'll start with introductions. So I think I will start with you, Tommy. If you could, please introduce yourself and share a little bit about your perspective on this topic.
Sure. Thanks, Patrick. My name is Tommy Perkins. I'm Director of Business Development with the EdFi Alliance. We're an operating entity owned within the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, and we source and fund and support data interoperability projects in K-12 systems around the country. Prior to that, I've been in ed tech and education for about a dozen years. I worked with Civitas Learning, and we did predictive analytics dashboards in higher education. Moved from the front end of data to the back end in terms of supporting interoperability.
Great. Welcome. So good to have you here today. Emilio, I guess we'll go to you next, please.
My name is Emilio Baez. I'm the Chief Product Officer and co-founder at EduFi. I'm also a co-founder of a data visualization platform that is called Edis. I've been in the education space for the last 20 years. I was the data warehouse manager for a school district of 50,000 students for over 7 years. So I've been in this space forever. I also do a lot of collaboration with the EdFi Alliance, Tommy, and we help districts integrate their data with the EdFi standard.
Fantastic. Welcome, Emilio. It's good to see you again. We see you at the EdFi Summit quite often. And last but not least, certainly not least, Sean.
All right. So my name is Sean McNeil. I'm the superintendent at the Fairhaven Public Schools here in Monmouth County, New Jersey. I've been an educator for 21 years. Prior to my time here, I was a principal in the Middletown Township Schools and a special ed supervisor prior to that. And I actually taught preschoolers with autism when I was in the classroom. Been data heavy and data rich from my first day walking through a classroom all the way through my time here as superintendent. In a small district, we have about 2 schools of about 1,000 kids. I do spend quite a bit of time personally at the ground level on data analysis and making sure it's as actionable as possible for our staff. When seeking a superintendent job, it was important to me to find a district that was small enough to really still keep in the grind, because that's where my passions are at. Happy to be here with you guys today.
Well, fantastic. We're happy to have you here, and Fairhaven is certainly lucky to have you, somebody who's willing to roll their sleeves up and get right in it. I'd like to start this conversation really drilling into this whole concept of actionable, because actionable means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I think as we start looking at a dashboard, what makes it actionable? And then I think in order to have that discussion, we have to talk a little bit about who's the audience. Is it for an individual or is it for a broad audience? And what are the required pieces to have it be actionable? As a starting point, I think that might be a good place to start. Anybody have any thoughts they want to throw out to start with here?
I'd be happy to share from that educator level what we look to do. And I know these two gentlemen in their fields could probably expand on it from the back end. But to me, the biggest challenge was when I came to Fairhaven, we were functioning fairly far below where the socio-demographics should have indicated where we were. So we were functioning about in 2016 at about 66% proficiency in ELA and math. And when you looked at our socio-demographic, that did not make a lot of sense. So there had to be some good reasons as to why data is the best place to start, right? We have incredible educators, incredible community. So we audited all of our curriculum. We found some issues within the curriculum that needed to be addressed. Certain standards weren't being emphasized and that sort of thing. So we hit the backbone. And then within those classrooms, down to small groups and individuals, we realized we didn't really have a ton of data, certainly not a lot of actionable data to make kind of those individual decisions for kids. So I'm in an interesting spot because we were able, the heavy lift of going from like 66 proficient to 80, 85 is an awesome thing, right? It was almost like 30% uptick in student outcomes. However, what I'm finding to be more granular and more difficult is going, not to sound cheesy, but going from that good to great piece of it, right? Which gets a lot more nuanced and requires even more actionable actions to be taken with regard to data, which what we found, the only answer is we got to make sure that everybody on the ground level has full ownership, full comfortability with interacting and interfacing with whatever data platform you're using. We started with iReady a few years back. We've since moved to Linkit as our main data warehouse. And what the approach we took was to make sure that as an admin team, we have 6 administrators. Before we could just roll it out to the staff, right? I've been a part of a number of things in my past where you got a new bright and shiny initiative you're going to roll out. People are overwhelmed. Teachers have a lot on their plate to begin with. So what our mantra was, let's make sure the admin team has a complete and utter mastery. Let's be the local experts on whatever system we're going to use, right? But not only the data itself, but also the tools we're going to use to disaggregate the data, break it down, turn it into actionable chunks. So that was our first move. Once we became and demonstrated to the staff that this could be done, right, that your admins were completely invested, we became the go-to people to roll this out for the staff. So things like PLCs, which I know that looks different in every district. We have a very good PLC, professional learning community infrastructure. So we capitalized on those moments to really get into classrooms with teachers and help them understand. So we took that big weight off of them, right? Handed them actionable steps, went through their groups, and that secured a ton of momentum and buy-in because over that first year, teachers really saw the outcomes. And as soon as you show a teacher an outcome, they're all in. Nobody wants their kids doing better than the people in the classroom. So as soon as they don't see it as a burden and they see it as a real opportunity to get more efficient with their kids, that's when we started that momentum really shift. That was our first step. And then through that, we were able to work with the staff to help them be the go-to people, whereas they can now run it and probably can speak much better to it than I can now at this point, which has been a game changer for us. So everything from small groups to individual students, identifying grade level issues, right? So if we find a hole across the same content area or skill, we're able to take a look back more pervasively globally as far as, is there an issue within the curriculum? Everybody seems to be having the same issue with this, down to that individual student piece of it. So having a dashboard that is customizable is huge for us. Again, we're very nuanced at this point. It's very important and super user-friendly. You know, I'm talking down to like color codes and visuals. And obviously the interoperability piece of it, having those things speaking to each other, whether it's your Power School linking into your dashboard, just makes that so much more efficient for us and really lets the teachers not worry about all that other stuff and just get right into actionable information.
Fantastic. You got quite a lot going on there. It sounds like it's working well.
Yeah, high expectations in this neck of the woods, so I got to do something to try to meet those expectations.
Good deal. Emilio, share a little bit about what you view as actionable in a dashboard. What makes it work?
Yeah, like I mentioned, I've been building dashboards for 20 years, and I've learned the hard way that a dashboard, a simple dashboard, could be great. You could have amazing colors. It could be user-friendly, but if it doesn't have actionable data, it doesn't really make sense or help. So for me, there are three items that have to be in an actionable dashboard. Number one is you have to have meaningful insight in there. For example, if the goal of the district, and it has to be aligned to the goals of the district. If your goal as a district or as a school is to reduce the amount of students that have missed 10% or more of instructional time, your dashboard has to reflect that. It has to tell a story. It has to have key performance indicator. It has to have trends, areas where you should focus. And not only that, you should have the ability to intervene, to do something. So what happens if I show you a dashboard that shows you that 95% of your students are level 2 in the state exam? What do I do? You should be able to click on something and immediately create an intervention or create some type of progress monitoring action that allows you to track the students who are not doing well in that area. Again, we built dashboards. It's been a process, right? We built the first series of dashboards. They were great. They looked amazing, but they were not actionable, right? So the challenge is to make it actionable. And the biggest thing for me is teachers and administrators don't have a lot of time in their hands, right? To make it very user-friendly. You have to make it super user-friendly so that with a couple of clicks, they can go from A to B with minimal effort. I think that's my input there on that area.
Great insight. And Tommy, maybe you can comment on kind of the variety of things that you've seen. EdFi is often thought of as a real enabler for dashboards, given the comprehensive set of data that is accessed through the standard. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you see successfully actionable and maybe not so actionable.
Yeah, I think Sean really covered a real breadth of things that I'd love to unpack as we go along, and there was so much insight there. But I think one of the things that kind of jumped out at me from both my work at EdFi and previously is a comment that Sean made about democratizing the data and getting that out to the front lines where people can act on it. That's ultimately where the actionability is, and creating that sort of data democracy culture of wonder where an administrator is not the data waiter who's doling out the insights, that it's being consumed on the front lines. And so we once had a client at a previous company who said, this is a university, who said, we're not trying to get 17% better overall. We're trying to get 1% better at 17 different things. That's how you go from good to great. And that really is about getting those insights out to the front lines. And one of the things we think about is being able to disaggregate that data so that you can start to find out where the real sore spots are in a population. So you've got chronic absenteeism is something that you're trying to move the needle on. Is that problem uniform across your student population, or is it concentrated in certain grades or demographic groups or zip codes or whatever? And that's all stuff that you get to through by making data interoperable. The analogy I would use is none of us would take out a mortgage based on just having looked at our checking accounts, right? We need to look at lots of different sources of data to tell us whether this is a good decision for us. And by the same token, you're going to want to look at information from the student information system, from the assessment system, et cetera, to get some kind of 360-degree view of your student population so that you can start to unpack it and see okay, where can we have the most impact on the problem of chronic absenteeism?
I like the term democratization of data to be able to take that and interpret it from lots of different layers.
Tommy, I wrote that down, and not trying to get 17% better at one thing, but 1% better at 17. I like those.
So we've talked about the aspiration of a dashboard. Let's talk a little bit about what's really good about them and what's the minefield, what's the dangers with them, because there's clearly actionable is important, but I'm sure there's more than just that in this conversation. Anybody want to jump in?
I think one thing that we've seen with education data is a mindset shift to that point about being actionable. That historically, and maybe where you see pockets of resistance around rolling out dashboards with staff and teachers, is that historically it's been viewed as an accountability thing, that a kind of a blame and shame, that you put these numbers in front of me and this is going to be how you slap my wrist and tell me that I'm underperforming at my job, versus what we really want to do is enable you to be more effective with your students and see what's working and what's not, and again instill that culture of wonder at the individual level. I tried this intervention with this student or with this group of students, and it had this impact, or it didn't have the impact I was thinking, and I can document that, or I can scale that up, share it with other teachers. We're not using it to expose people. We're using it to everybody to help everyone iterate and move the needle.
Tommy, I'll jump on that too. The culture we've tried to instill here is really to celebrate that work, as opposed to making it about the student outcomes, which I think people are inherently and intrinsically motivated by without us cracking the whip. Was just to celebrate those conversations. So if we know that you're coming into a classroom and a teacher possibly isn't getting the outcomes that perhaps 3 or 4 colleagues are, but through those conversations, she's showing us the work, they're going through what they're looking at, the interventions that they did, why they did them, we end up celebrating that, right? So a teacher will be positively evaluated based on the work they're doing, right? Not necessarily those outcomes, because we know where that leads. Like eventually that will lead to those outcomes. Sometimes it's a newer teacher who just needs to continue to hone instructional practice, and this is how you do it. You know what I mean? Let's get there. And then not to sound cliched again, but the whole notion from the effectiveness of the dashboard, you put 1,000 things on the dashboard, you get to that data rich, information poor kind of place where it's what do we need it to do? What we need it to do might be different than what a long branch needs in a particular area. What's going on for us? So the ability to be able to make those changes, whether it's having our ability to do it locally or a good enough relationship with whoever your dashboard provider is, that there's ongoing availability to either PD or just some help, just some support as to helping this speak a language that makes sense for us. That's been huge for us too. So I'm sure, everybody, would agree with that piece of it, having that ability to interface, so that, yeah, there's 15 things I can put on here, but I really need these 8, or at least for the next year or two. And this is what I'm going to, be looking to do. But that culture piece is huge. Just making sure you're celebrating teachers for doing that work. I almost liken it to when you have a parent who's seeking a child to be placed in an advanced pathway, because it feels like an achievement. It feels like they got into something or their child achieved something. And sometimes we lose sight of the journey, right? That's really what the whole learning is about, right? Forget what course you end up in. Where are you as a learner? Are you growing against yourself? Are you making that progress? We try to take the same approach with the staff, right? So let's not lose sleep over your particular outcomes this year. Are you doing the work that we know is going to lead down that path? So that's the culture we've tried to set. I think we've done a decent job with it, but you're right. People do worry about, here's a bunch of numbers that probably aren't saying things that people want to see. It's almost irrelevant to me, right? It's what are we doing with them? Mm-hmm. And that's what we try to establish.
Thinking along the lines of the limitations, right? Like some of the limitations that I've seen with dashboards in my career. I think number one is data quality, right? Like you can have the most amazing dashboards. If the data doesn't have the quality, then you'll be painting the wrong picture, right? I've dealt this with like source system, like data not being accurate in the SISs and the source of truth. So I think that for me, that's key. So we do a lot of work on focusing that the data has quality before we even show dashboards to users, right? There's only one chance for that first impression. So we want to make sure that that data is revealed to users when it's 100% accurate. The other thing is complexity. There are a lot of dashboards, just because of the nature of the data, they end up being too complex. And like I said before, like you have to have easy to consume dashboards. Otherwise, user engagement is pretty much non-existent, right? The other thing is customization. Not a lot of vendors allow for customization of dashboard. I think in this space, there's a tendency to think that there's a dashboard that is generic enough that could work for everybody, and that's not the case, right? I learned that you have to, if you're a vendor in this space and you have dashboards, you have to be ready to actually sit down with every school district and do some one-to-one sessions and learn about their KPIs. You can have two districts that are a mile away from each other, and they measure completely different things. So there's not one dashboard that fits all. So in my mind, those are the big three limitations that I've seen working with school districts.
Is access to the data a problem, or is interoperability come a long way in making that easier?
Yes, I think it's still a problem. It's not the problem that it once was. I think we're all aware that this is our students' data. And in some ways, if we're collecting this data about our students, we almost have a moral imperative to do something with it about this for the students about whom that data was collected, not the next way. We don't want to act on autopsy data. We want to act on real-time data about these students. And so that puts an impetus on us, the vendor community, or the standards bodies, the vendor community, the implementer community, and of course the educators. And ultimately, that's something that we see at EdFi as our role is that a lot of times an individual district is going to have a hard time putting pressure on a system of record to make that data readily available, and it's like through an API, a consumable format that's going to make it real-time actionable. And so sometimes we have to aggregate that demand among multiple districts that are working with us to make that possible. But yeah, and I think Emilio has fought that battle on the front lines in terms of cracking open these systems and getting the data quickly and in a readable format.
If you were to look at the work that you've done and say, what one step do I want to do more of? I'm a firm believer in incremental improvement, incremental change. What's the one thing? What's the thing at the top of the list that you think you want to do next, Sean, or Amelia, you think has to be done with a greater urgency with the next dashboard that you set up?
So assessment is everything, right? So everything that we're talking to is, and Emilio, you hit on it with regard to making sure the data is high quality. So our first work before we even worried about dashboard pieces of it and kind of data warehouses was making sure that we were using high quality assessment, which has been like a 3 or 4 year thing that we've done. So we audited our current assessments. Are we asking complex enough questions to invite complex thinking, certain things like that? So making sure that the assessment that is going to feed the data pool, those are of high quality, right? So then better chance that the data is going to be of high quality if the initial assessment is. So that's work at the school district level. For me, one of those things that led to, if I pick an elementary class, for instance, I used to have your reading levels and you would have maybe small groups based on that. And what we've been able to do by getting more efficient and more effective with the use of things like data dashboards is that it's things like skills-based groups, right? So I might have 2 readers at a very different level, but they might be struggling with the same skill. So no reason I can't hit a small group triage on a particular skill for learners that may even still be at different reading levels. So the ability to just get more, again, efficient within the classroom has been huge. Where we're hoping to go next is, and some of our staff is a little bit further along than others, but is back to that assessment pool, which is using, again, for instance, we use Linkage just as an example, but being able to create like more standards-based custom local assessments like on the fly, right? So we have our benchmarks, we have our things that we're expecting of all teachers across the board, but we want our teachers to feel even more empowered with the data and the use of the dashboard to go create their own stuff based on what's in front of them, that unit, and being able to do something that class needed. Maybe the whole 5th grade didn't need it, but this group did. And then being able to then interface that when it populates to the dashboard and do something with it. For us, the work is going to continue at that kind of in the trenches level. And it's going to be a combination of assessment with further integration with the dashboard and making sure our guys are in a good enough space to use it effectively, hopefully.
Emilio, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I would say if we have to focus on one thing, assuming that we follow the guidelines that we were talking about, right? You have quality data, user friendliness, customizable. Assuming that all that is in place, what I would focus 100% is in user adoption. I think it's the biggest barrier that we have to deal with working with K-12 institutions. It's hard to throw another thing on a teacher's plate. And if you don't make the data go to the teacher instead of the teacher going to the data, it's not going to happen. Even the most successful implementation that I've done, maybe it's 50% engagement, what we've been able to obtain. So just making sure that even if the teachers don't log into a system, that they receive the data that they need, either through a secure email or through some sort of notification where they can see every Monday morning, they can see, hey, this is how I was last week compared to the week before, right? Or this is how I was this month compared to the month before. Trying to put that data on the hands of the end users, which will create engagement in turn, right? Because they're going to start looking at that. They're going to see the notification, look how they're doing. And if they're not doing great, then they're going to click and go into the software and start using it. So I think putting the data on the hands of the end users is what I will focus on my next dashboard.
I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball in here and ask you guys to comment on the potential impact of AI. When you talk about dashboards, I don't want to say they're static, but they're pretty tightly defined and they have a very specific presentation. There is some logic or some prevailing thought that suggests that AI is going to do away with the need for a dashboard and replace it with the ability to generate kind of data on demand for very specific evaluation, much of which goes into a dashboard. Any thoughts on that? Have you seen anything that is encouraging, or do you think that's too far off? What do you think?
I get torn at the school level. So we're deep in the mix now, trying to figure out where and when. I feel like on the learning piece of it, we feel like we have a deep responsibility to embrace AI and make sure that we're teaching our kids how to use it responsibly and do that. I know there's been things all over the place. I think the New York State Department of Ed originally had banned it and then came full circle on taking that away and making sure that they are going to do something with it. We owe it to our kids to certainly embrace it. If that's going to be the case, then we certainly owe it to the staff and we owe it to ourselves as admin to make sure we're being as efficient as possible. I don't love it as a thought generator. I love it as an assistant. I love it as an efficiency module. So that's where I would expect it to go. But at that end user level, I don't need the staff. I enjoy it. I think there's a lot to be gleaned from disaggregating the data and really sinking into it in that process. I don't necessarily need every one of my staff members to be bogged down with that. So if the AI piece of this can be added and create even more quickly actionable data that somebody with a certificate is vetting to be legitimate, that would be the key to me, is that the district would have to have a process in place to make sure that what is being spit out is vetted and that we agree, we concur, we see that. But if there's a way to get to a point where you're getting more actionable information to the staff, I certainly would not be philosophically opposed to that. These guys can probably talk about how that actually looks on the back end. We are going to take the approach that we owe this to our kids. It would be completely irresponsible to say AI is not allowed, we're not going to deal with it. And if that's the case, then we need to take the same approach with teaching staff and the admin. We've done some workshops last year with the staff, and what we're trying to say is that even from a lesson planning perspective, I'm not necessarily opposed if a teacher wants to play with AI to create and develop a lesson plan, let's say for the outsiders in an 8th grade situation. But the person with the teaching cert needs to review this information, make sure the enduring understandings, the essential questions, the teaching points are all completely valid and vetted. If that helps kill a little bit of time and you can spend more time looking at data and more time doing things with your professional mind, I'm all for it. But I know where I would hesitate is that I want to make sure that stuff's always vetted by somebody with a credential, that it's coming out here and that it is there for effective and valid and we can use it, and just worry about the complacency of falling into it just gets spit out and we roll and then we look up and it's 12 months later and we're doing an autopsy, so to speak.
I think the things that we've been thinking about a lot at EdFi is only as intelligent as the data that undergirds it. And a lot of this really comes down to, are you taking AI to your data or are you taking your data to AI? Which is to say, are you putting a chatbot on top of your own discrete body of data? And is that data clean and secure and interoperable and comprehensive about your students? Or are you going to an outside site, ChatGPT, the free version, and putting in all kinds of prompts that you are, by doing so, you're unwittingly giving away a lot of data and training a model that you don't have control over? And that's something that I think people are starting to get their minds around as well. But I think if you think about AI in the context of the next evolution from advanced analytics, now you're moving from the predictive to the prescriptive. It really does come down to, again, garbage in, garbage out. If that underlying data isn't clean and secure, then you get the hallucinogenics and stuff that we talk about with, or hallucinations that we talk about with AI. But we have seen some really compelling uses of it where based on the quality of your prompts, you can request a certain dashboard or a certain view of the data that's going to be very actionable for someone who's making a decision in the moment about a group of students or a classroom or an individual student to understand what's going on based on various sources of data that are informing that large language model.
I love AI. I love it. It gets rid of that blank page syndrome. It helps you do a lot of work. It makes you more productive, especially for things that are very repetitive, like mapping, for example. If you're mapping the FI standard to another standard, right? AI could do beautiful work. Actually, we've done it, right? As Edify, we've done some of that work, and it's beautiful. I think unless you can get a cyborg controlled by AI, get on a plane and travel and meet with your client in person and sit down and have a very deep discussion about what their needs are. Until that happens, I think AI is not going to cover 100%, at least for building dashboards, right? It could give you a template, right? You can ask AI, give me what are the dashboard charts that I should have to target like second grade teachers who focus on special education, right? AI is going to do a good job. It's going to tell you, hey, I think you should focus on this type of data. But when it comes to actually building the dashboards, making them actionable and interaction with the user, I don't think AI is there yet. And I'm not sure it would ever be, honestly.
Yeah, we're a long way from AI supplanting human judgment. That's going to be part of the equation for who knows how long.
No, and I appreciate the entertaining the response. I think that it's so prevalent in so many conversations today that would be remiss if we didn't at least talk about it a little bit. And you're right, Tommy, we could talk about it for days, but that is not that's the purpose. Let's go back to the more classic dashboard use that we've been talking about. And I guess one thing that we haven't really talked about is data privacy and security and risks or exposures or opportunities that the dashboard would provide, that a dashboard would provide in that area. Are there extra risks? Are there extra capabilities? Whoever wants to chime in.
I can talk about that one because it's big. It's something we have to keep in mind every time we build a dashboard. I think there's three things that we have to be very careful with. Number one is data encryption. The data has to be encrypted not only at rest but also in transit. When that data is being communicated from the server to the client computer, there's got to be encryption there. The data behind the dashboard have to be encrypted. The other thing is access control. So row level security. We have to make sure that based on who you are, we only show you the students that you're supposed to see. If you're a school administrator, you should only be seeing your school. If you're a district person, then you can see the entire district. And if you're a teacher, you can only see the 15, 20 kids that you're teaching. That's number two. And number three, compliance with FERPA. You have to be compliant with FERPA. That is huge. Make sure your clients don't send emails with the student information. If you're going to share information, it has to be securely through an SFTP or some type of API with an SSL certificate on it. To me, those are the biggest thing. I know I got a little too technical there, but those are the three things that I have to deal the most when I'm building dashboards.
Any other thoughts on data privacy or security?
I mean, I think a lot of it, and this isn't just specific to dashboards, but I think a lot of it is also just audience dependent and having that sort of sense of data stewardship among the users. And I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and somebody was describing how there'd been all of this pushback. Whenever you roll out a new tool, now I've got to do my job differently, et cetera. And so this was about two-factor authentication and people pushing back on that, not wanting to adopt it. And the only district that didn't fight it among teachers and staff was one that had been subject of a ransomware attack. After the fact, they get it, right? But I think that a lot of these data breaches do just come from people, I don't want to say being sloppy, but there is a way in which we handle data in the analog world that is not going to work in the digital realm. And when we pass around printouts, that doesn't work the same when you're emailing around PDFs that's got student data on there. And a lot of times that's just people making that transition to the digital realm and how they handle data and who they give that access to, and whether they're abiding by those safeguards or not is really where a lot of the these leaks occur.
I'll just speak from the school district level, just very thankful to have third-party entities like these guys to be on that stuff, right? We used to use Google Drive, and before that it was folders with sheets of paper. So being able to have a secure dashboard for staff to be able to access is very comforting from a school district's perspective.
Any other thoughts? Have we missed anything about this that you think is compelling that needs to be shared with people that are evaluating or implementing and looking for new tricks and features?
No, I'll just say from our perspective, we would not have come to where we've come to on that school district ground level without a high quality data warehouse and a dashboard that can help us make sense. For those of you that are out there that are leading school districts or schools or a classroom that may be watching, there's so much information for each and every individual little human that comes through your classroom that anything you could do to get more quickly actionable with it is going to change that kid's life. So for us, it was data warehouses because we had 1,500 different pieces of data that we've now been able to put in and synthesize for each kid into one place, and a dashboard that can make us more efficiently react and respond and be proactive with it. I highly recommend some version of it and doing your homework to see what works for you in your district, but it has been a game changer for us, and we're excited for what it will continue to mean for our district.
One thing that we skipped, and it was part of some of the items we had on the agenda there, Patrick. One of the things I've seen is dashboards normally target like district people or your school administrators, but it's rare to see a dashboard that target individuals, right? Like individual teachers and individual students, right? Put dashboards on the hands of teachers and users and give them insights that relates to them, right? If you're going to give me a dashboard that talks about attendance rate for their school district or for a specific school, that's great. But what does it mean at the individual level? I think the space lacks that. Dashboards normally don't target individual people, and I think it's a low-hanging fruit that we can attack.
I think it's a great point.
One thing I was thinking as we were talking about this, the culture of data, is making sure that your staff and your teachers and your team just have an overall sense that dashboards can tell us the what. They can spell out where the opportunity zones are in a student population. They don't tell you why. And that's really where teachers almost, and anyone who acts with a student kind of acts as the quantitative or the qualitative researcher at that point. If we want to apply an equity lens to what we're seeing in a dashboard, and we know intuitively that demography is not destiny and that causation is not correlation, that's where we look at a dashboard and say, okay, now we got to get to the why. That means taking these insights and these opportunity zones and start talking to students and understanding what's going on. It's a starting point for a conversation. It's not the period on the end of the sentence.
Yes. You guys have been fabulous and have provided a lot of really great insight in this topic. I'm gonna share my takeaways, and then you guys can critique them and tell me if I got them wrong, what I missed. But it's very clear to me across the board that dashboards have to be easy to use. There has to be some level of customization to fit the particular circumstance you're looking at. And they have to be fed with high quality of data. Being fed with high quality data is better than it used to be, but it still has its challenges, and we'll continue to work on that. But with that, a dashboard actually you want to get it as close to the people that are using it as possible. And it will focus the attention of the why. It will give you a language and a structure to work to democratize this data, to be able to interpret it, to figure out why, and doing so in a positive way with both students and staff increases its use. Regardless of the group that's working with, there has to be a direct line to action. You have to find some way to take this, turn it into action to really drive overall adoption, which is crucial to making these work. Assessment appears to be a really strong starting point. So you've got a place to start, and then you're able to measure what progress is made and how much, and then you can go dig into the why. Why is it that it's changed in some places? And then as it comes to data privacy, I think essentially the message is we have to be diligent about data privacy, and the fact that we're using this tool or that tool doesn't really change the requirements. We have to be careful with the data. We have to be mindful about how it's used and where it's sent, and continuously work to secure that. Having said all of that, there's lots of future in front with dashboards. There's lots of ways for them to grow and to continue to be better. Maybe it's through AI, maybe it's not, but it's certainly not going to be overtaken by AI or replaced by AI. How did I do? Is that a fair summary of our discussion here today?
That's pretty good.
Yeah, love it, Patrick. Well done.
Good. I want to begin by thanking all of you for your time I think you're all doing good work. You're clearly making a difference, and you're clearly passionate about what you're doing. I thank you for spending this time with us and sharing your mind share with us. And until next time, thank you. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
All right. Nice to see you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Alrighty.
Thank you for listening. ClassLink is proud to be the meeting place to facilitate these conversations. If you have a topic idea, send it to perspectives@classlink.com. To keep hearing our perspectives, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify, and subscribe to us on YouTube.